Hi guys, Goffy here, and apologies for not having posted a video for a few weeks, but I've been pretty busy, and one of the reasons I've been busy is because I've been on a little holiday to the Lake District, and you can bet there's going to be a video on that coming very, very soon. This video, however, is going to be a comparison between the FUJIFILM simulation of Velvia and the actual film stock itself that I'm going to shoot in my Leica M6. If you follow me along on Instagram, and I guess if not, why not, then you'll know that I took a trip to York to do this video. I have previously done a video very similar to this, and that was comparing the Fuji acros emulation against real acros film. That video will be down in the description, and that was a video that I really enjoyed making, so I thought, you know what, let's continue this and we'll work our way through some different film stocks. Now there's actually two types of Velvia when it comes to shooting film. There is a 50 ISO and there is a 100 ISO. Now for this video I actually chose the 100 ISO, which is actually likely the least popular of the two. Most people buy the 50 ISO as that's the one that's generally more well known. I went for 100 ISO though because I knew I was going to be shooting this film around the town of York, and that meant I was going to be shooting an awful lot handheld, so the extra stop of light makes it an awful lot easier to shoot. So typically this is a film that is used by landscape photographers mainly because of its slow speed, and it's known for very, very vivid colours, super saturated, and it's really good for things like your sunsets and sunrise pictures. If you've ever moved your Fuji camera into that Velvia setting, you'll see straight away just how bright and vibrant the colours are. And Fuji, when they aren't busy discontinuing film, they're actually pretty busy making sure that the most expensive film on the market. This is not a cheap film. This film costs around 18 to sort of £20 here in the UK. It's also a slide film, so it needs to be developed in E6 chemicals. I don't have any E6 chemicals, so I also had to send it away. By the time you factor everything in, you're looking at the best part of what, £25, £26 for a roll, and you're starting to head towards that pound per picture. That's starting to get to sort of like Instax and Polaroid territory when it comes to shooting film. But there is one really cool thing about slide film, and that's just how cool it looks. If you've never seen slide film in person, then well, you're actually missing out. There's something kind of magical about how it looks. Honestly, it's a bit odd holding film that's like in the right way. Now this film, like I said, is more suited to landscape stuff, but I think we actually got some pretty good results because it was a bright sunny day, which meant I could lean on that low ISO and still shoot it pretty well handheld. Camera-wise, I was using the Fuji X100V. What I did with that was I put it into the Velvia emulation mode and left all other settings as standard. What I also did was I set the ISO of the Fuji camera to 160 ISO, so it's base level, and left it at that. That meant that I could actually use the Fuji to meter. Whatever the Fuji was showing, I then put the same settings into the Leica M6, but just added one stop of light to kind of counter the 160 ISO in the Fuji and the 100 ISO of the film. And this actually worked pretty well. Most of the film is very well exposed, and that's a good thing when it comes to slide film. Slide film can be very temperamental. It doesn't have that sort of exposure latitude that you get with traditional negative film. Something that I find that is always pretty hard with film is once you've scanned it in, what do you do when it comes to kind of post-processing? Especially in a video like this where I want to do a bit of a comparison. I don't want to go to town editing the film, otherwise it's not really a comparison, is it? So in terms of what I did, once I scanned the film in, I just made a few tweaks. Now one of those was to correct the white balance. For some reason my scanner, when it scanned, came through quite a strong magenta cast, so I took that down a little bit by adding in a bit of green tint. I then changed the black point too, so with scanners they tend to try and get as much information as they can out of the image, and you end up with quite a flat image because it's trying to retain as much detail as possible. Having looked at the actual slides themselves, some of the black parts of the images are pure black, so I've changed the black point on a lot of them to kind of add the contrast back in and get it looking like the film itself. And then on a very few images, I changed the exposure ever so slightly, but never more than half a stop. Some of them just needed that little bit more light, so I've tweaked it a little bit. But beyond that, these slides are pretty much straight scans. I feel like straight away when you look at these images, there's pretty big differences between the two, and I don't think that's all that unexpected really. Shooting digital and shooting slide, you're always going to end up with pretty different results. Your Fuji sensor in your camera is going to be very, very good at capturing high dynamic range, whereas slide film is known for having a pretty limited range but having really nice colors and tones. And you can see that in these images. The dynamic range of the Fuji camera is considerably better than the film. And by better, I just mean technically, because personally I actually prefer the lower dynamic range of the film, as it adds a bit more of feel and contrast to the image, where you've got more pure blacks and pure whites. It kind of makes the image feel a bit more real, rather than being flat and a little bit maybe HDR looking. So I think next up, let's have a talk about white balance. Now looking at the images, there's quite a big difference between the two. The film is quite warm and the Fuji camera files are quite cool. Having a look at the film, the actual film itself does look quite warm, and that's quite common with Velvia. Velvia is known for having quite warm tones to it. I personally do find myself, when shooting digital Fuji cameras like the X100V, I find they are quite cold. I quite often, for my own tastes, will add a bit of a tint to the image to make them a little bit warmer, as I feel like Fuji cameras shoot quite cool, and that's not a problem, it's so easily changed. But in like a like-for-like comparison, it feels like maybe the emulation should just be a little bit warmer. Both the film and the digital are producing very vibrant and saturated shots, which is exactly what you'd imagine. This film stock is predominantly used by landscape photographers to get really vivid looking landscapes, and you can imagine how much of a difference this would make if you're shooting film to things like sunsets. The downside to this though is bright saturated files can often be quite a bad thing for most other situations, like it's not really ideal for things like portraits. However, I think actually running around York with the bright sunlight, the images have actually come out looking really nice, and I actually quite like the saturation in both of the files. I think one of the biggest differences between the two is how it handles blues. The hue and the saturation are really quite different. You can see this in pretty much every single file. I'm not sure which one I prefer. There's kind of pros and cons to both, but they are really quite different. And I think from a color point of view, that seems to be the bit where these two films are really quite different to each other. I'm pretty sure everyone that shoots film has had a time where you've been reviewing the images and you've been blown away at just how good it looks. If you take a look at these two images, I absolutely love the Velvia image. It's kind of hard to describe what it is about it, but I just love the colors and the tones. Now, the lighting changed an awful lot between these two images. You can see there's a lot harder shadows in the film compared to the digital. This isn't a very good comparison, but you can see just how good film sometimes looks when everything aligns perfectly. what are my thoughts then? Well, I didn't think that the film and the emulation were going to look very similar at all. I was coming into this thinking that the digital files of the Fuji were going to just be saturated to benefit digital, and there wasn't actually going to be any link to Velvia other than the fact that the colours just were bright and vibrant. I don't think that's true though. I think there is quite a lot of similarities between the two. The biggest differences though are, one, the dynamic range. The digital has an awful lot more range than the film does. Next up, I think, is the general warmth of the image. I think the Fuji files are still a little bit cool, so I'd probably still go with adding a little bit more of a warm tint to my image on my white balance settings. And the blues are very different. Maybe the chrome blue effects might help a little bit in terms of making them match up a bit better. If you've seen the acros video, you'd have seen that they were actually pretty close. There was just slightly different sort of tonalities to the image. I think in this case there's a lot more difference than that video, but it's still a very, very good attempt. I think generally if you were looking at just film versus straight out camera JPEGs, then I probably do generally prefer the film images, but if you were to post-process some of the JPEGs or the RAW files, I'm sure you could get images that look an awful lot closer. From a digital point of view, I rarely ever find myself using the Velvia simulation. I don't think that's going to change. To me, Velvia is just a little bit too saturated for my tastes. I prefer slightly more muted colours, and the others like classic chrome and things like that are always going to take the place for me over things like Velvia. I would be really interested to know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think they compare quite well? Which do you prefer? Have you got experience of shooting Velvia film in the past? Also, if you live in the UK and you haven't been to York, I would highly recommend it. It's a really good day out and you can definitely make a weekend of it. There's so much there to do, and it's one of my favourite places to visit here in the UK. If you've enjoyed this video though, please do not forget to like and subscribe. There is plenty more Fuji, Leica and film content coming. I've had a bit of a spending spree recently, so there's lots of new gear that I can't wait to show you on the channel. Thank you for watching guys, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!